Hey Tyler, thanks again for agreeing to come on the show and talk with me. How are you doing?
Yeah, no problem. I'm doing fine. Good Friday.
Just as a bit of a background, this is actually the first episode we're doing of this show, and I met Tyler through Twitter, and we got to talking. I was just blown away by his understanding of everything economics, and I reached out to him and I asked him if he'd be willing to come on to discuss this further, and he agreed. So, Tyler, before we start, I'll throw it over to you. Do you want to give us a quick background on who you are and how it is that you're such an expert on everything economics?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I started looking into the financial system during COVID. I was recovering from some health issues, had me at home, and the economy went crazy, and I started looking into it. And you get the same, everybody says the same thing in the financial media, pundits, it's all the same. But some stuff didn't quite add up with how they said everything worked. And I didn't get a hint of what was going on until earlier this year when I was just watching a live stream with Robert Barnes, and he was talking about Eurodollars and a shadow banking system. And I was like, no way. They couldn't hide that from everybody. Like, they can hide stuff about COVID for a little while, but a shadow banking system that's existed since sometime after World War II? No way. I started digging into it, listening to a guy by the name Jeff Snyder, who runs the Eurodollar University YouTube channel, website, and going through it and listening to him and then just fact checking the heck out of him. I was like, man, this thing is real. And nobody talks about it. I just did a hyper deep dive into everything.
It's funny. I actually heard about it through Robert Barnes too when he was on the Viva Barnes podcast. And then, but I didn't take it seriously until I started talking to you about it. My first question, can you explain what exactly is the euro dollar?
The Eurodollar is a system in which, outside of the American banking system, dollar denominated debt is created. To explain that as simply as possible, in our current fractional reserve banking system, dollars are created when a bank lends out money. In Canada, our banks lend out Canadian dollars, creating new Canadian dollars. In America, it's the US dollar, and so on and so forth down. What's interesting about the euro dollar is it starts in Europe, again, after World War II, and they start lending out dollars, counterfeit digital dollars.
So I get that. So you used the phrase before with me as well, the US denominated debt. But like how does it work? Do you walk to any bank in England, for example, and you say, I'd like to open a Eurodollar account?
Well, you don't say euro dollars. It's this hush system where you don't speak about the dollar. You would, and it's not mainly for us, the retail customer. It's mostly between banks. Barclays can go to any London bank and say, hey, I need a loan of $100 million, US dollars. And just like that, a new $100 million US dollars is created. And it gets filtered throughout the system.
Let me frame what my goal here is in this discussion is to figure out how this Eurodollar impacts Canada. And we'll get there. But I'm going to have to People are going to think I'm the dumbest person with these simple questions, but like, when a bank goes to another bank to get a loan, like, how does that work? That if I came to you and I asked you for a loan so I can buy a house, and then you turn around and you ask me for a loan so you can buy a house, like, when would a bank need to go to another bank to get a loan?
Yeah, let me think. It happens on a minute by minute basis at basically the speed of communication, and they do it because it's how money is created in the system, and you need money to get anything done. So a simple transaction of bank A wanting to buy sovereign debt, they can't use their reserve money because that's legally required to be a reserve. So they need to go out into the wider banking system, into money markets, and acquire money.
So let's go back to what you said about their reserves. Like, they're legally required to have a minimum amount of reserves, correct?
Yes.
Off the top of your head, this ties into fractional reserve banking, correct?
Yes.
Do you know what that is again? Is it in percentage terms, like 1% has to be, or what is it?
It is legally they're only required to keep a tenth of their deposits as reserve, but that has no bank operates on that. Like they're terrified of ever having an actual bank run nowadays. Since 2007 ish, they have they keep their reserve as large as possible.
Sorry, they keep it as large as possible, or they're
Yeah, they keep it as large as possible.
Oh, so it's higher than a tenth. It's 1%.
Instead of having, say, a minimum, say you get deposits of, say, 100 million. Okay, the maximum they will loan out on that is maybe 50 million of new money. They are trying to keep as much money in their hands as they possibly can while still conducting business.
Well, why is that? I always thought that bankers were just greedy and they're lending out more than they should.
They still are lending out more than they should. Their reserves will not back everything 1-to-1, but they're lending out as much as they can while still having enough backup to, if you had too many withdrawals, they could keep cash moving and then go into the money markets, get more money, and float until the demand dies down and they could go back to the way they're operating. And yeah, we're told that bankers are extremely greedy people. But yeah, sure, you're going to get nickel and dimed, but it's more out of necessity than, hey, give me more money. Because if they don't operate the way they do currently in the system, you see what we have around us, which is a growing recession, which may go into a deep recession, a deep depression.
Okay, let's go back to one basic question. A bank run is you put $100 million in the bank. They've given out $200 million in loans, and then everybody wants their money in one day, but there's not enough money. But if they can just print money, why would you have a bank run if the government could just print money? I'm asking these questions as like a adversarial perspective.
The first thing I would say is governments really specifically central banks, because they are supposed to control the money, because that's the definition of a central bank. They don't print money, and they haven't for a long time. All they do is they control banks, or they try to control, I should say, banks printing the money through the loans with rates. As rates go up, it costs the bank more to create money, and they pass that on to you. They give a little bit of a markup because they got to make money on it. But governments don't print money. They could completely. They could print money out of nowhere, and we could go from debt money to I don't want to say hard money, because it wouldn't be backed by anything, but closer to it.
Okay, let's go back to something you told me when we were on Twitter. Like, how do you get, so going back to the Eurodollar, let's just assume that Eurodollars are like counterfeit US dollars. So you got all of these counterfeit US dollars floating around in Europe. How does that get to America?
Through the complexities of a private ledger system. Like, Eurodollars, for the most part, aren't on a bank's balance sheet. They don't write, oh, we have X millions of Eurodollars. All that private loans between banks is on a private digital ledger that regulators never see the light of day. And since it's in the digital ledger system, a Eurodollar is indistinguishable from a dollar. So it just functions as a dollar. A European bank that needs to do business in America can just send money, send as much Eurodollars as they want through the SWIFT system, and it'll end up in America or wherever it's needed.
I'm just trying to figure out, how is this not fraud? You just have a bank. Basically, one bank in England is just creating numbers on a digital ledger saying, oh, we have this much funny money. And then they lend it to a second bank, and that second bank just absorbs it into real US money. Real.
Yeah, it is completely a fraudulent system. And the Fed refuses to look at their money supply and then compare it to what they see in the real world to say, oh, we have a major discrepancy of what we can tell that US banks have created versus the amount of dollars out in the global economy.
I want to just clarify something. I just called it fraud. So I said it's fraudulent. But would it be more accurate to say that either fractional reserve is also fraud, or to say the Eurodollar is just basically fractional reserve where they're just infinitely stretching it? I'm trying to conceptualize it for.
Yeah, I know, it's a really good
like
question. At least with your standard fractional reserve banking, there is a reserve. But with Eurodollars, there's nothing. Like, the only reserve that there is now is that it's a collateralized loan. But the problem with that is these collateralized loans are using collateral that has been pledged multiple times.
Are you talking about the collateralized loans have been pledged to get money out of the fractional reserve U.S. banking system, or to get it out of the euro?
No, so if I go with a bunch of US treasuries and I say, this is my collateral, give me however millions of Eurodollars, all right? I most likely got that collateral from some other bank who got it from some other bank, and so forth, and they've all pledged it forward.
So we got two problems. One is you have this counterfeit money that's infinitely stretchable, and then the other one is that the collateral on the collateral side, they're also being dishonest.
Yeah, you've got double dipping everywhere.
And this is exclusively by banks. Like I can't go to a Walmart and get Eurodollars kind of thing.
Technically, yes. If you were to go and the Eurodollar is the reserve currency of the world. So if you were to transact using a credit card, whatever credit card company you use contacts a specialized bank-like entity that goes out into the money markets and retrieves whatever currency you are using. So if you go to America, it's dollars, and they've gone out into the money markets and found US dollars. But because it's all on a digital ledger system, there's no way to tell, are those real US dollars or are those Euro dollars?
Okay, this is super confusing. So let's go back to something that you actually said to me once. Again, I'll accept that it's between banks. So you got banks in Europe or America, whatever, they're engaging in Eurodollar transactions. It's like the Bitcoin thing. Like, how do you get from US dollars to Bitcoin, and how do you get back from Bitcoin to US dollars? But how does that work with Eurodollars? Specifically for corporation, because I'm trying to get to the point of the 2006 housing crisis. Does this have anything to do with corporations, or is it exclusively banks?
Banks created the Eurodollar system, but everything is using Eurodollars. If a corporation wants to make a purchase of, I don't know, shipping containers, all right, they're selling them in US dollars because everybody wants US dollars. There's not enough US dollars to go around, and intermixed with US dollars is Eurodollars. So they go to their bank and they say, hey, we need 100 million US dollars. Maybe they have it on their account that they are owed $100 million. The bank probably doesn't have $100 million on hand that they can just give to their customer. So they go out into the money markets, retrieve what money they need, give it to the customer, and it goes through the transaction.
Okay. We're not really, like, we or corporations are not really willing participants in this fraud. They don't realize that a crime is being committed.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say all corporations, because you would have entities like, say, hedge funds. Probably hedge fund managers and the people that work there know what's going on. But, your standard corporation, like an Amazon, probably doesn't. They just know, oh, I go to the bank, I get money.
Can you bring this back for me? From, I guess, the late 1940s, when you got the Eurodollar, to 2006, what happened? What got destabilized? And how does that tie into the housing collapse?
Okay, so sometime in the 40s, it's hard to track down because it's all private ledgers that they're not going to release them. Some offshore banks inside London were like, hey, we want to transact in US dollars. We really like the dollar, but we don't like dealing with the Federal Reserve. So we're just going to denominate our debt in dollars. So hence creating the Eurodollar. And it was only possible because of the technological advancements of computers. And as computers got better and faster, you could do more transactions, have more Eurodollars, so that by the time of the Great Inflation starting in 1965, computers are ubiquitous through the banking system. And throughout Europe, they're transacting in these Eurodollars because they love the dollar. It's a great currency. It's completely unregulated. They don't have to deal with governments. They can make as much dollars as needed for growth and whatever their growth target is. But during that time, people, very smart people in the banking system, start looking at the Federal Reserve's public balance sheets versus the United States spending. And the spending starting in World War II doesn't really add up how much gold reserves they have. Then you get into the 1950s with Korea, and there's definitely a depegging between dollars and gold reserves. And then after the settlement of Korea, you get the US creating massive stockpiles of ICBMs, which then leads into the Vietnam War, where in like a 12-hour battle early on in the Vietnam War, you have more bombs and artillery being dropped than the entirety of Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy. Banks inside and outside the United States start to panic that, hey, maybe this scam we're running will collapse. So they start, while it's still available, redeeming their dollars for gold. And sometime after that period in the 70s, up until the financial crisis, trust between banks breaks down. They know the money is fraudulent, so they start demanding collateral. And it starts becoming more and more and more collateral, and there's not enough collateral to go around. So eventually, in 2000s, starting in 2006, the demand for collateral outpaces the amount of collateral available, even with corporate junk bonds thrown in there being used for collateral and subprime mortgage securities being thrown in there for collateral. And eventually, there's no more collateral, so the amount of money created slows. Banks start getting scared because money needs to hit a minimum speed going through the system. Otherwise, payments can't be made on their debt. So as that starts to slow, they stop creating money, hence the economy slows. And now you're stuck with banks defaulting on payments, so they have to start selling off the collateral. The more collateral you sell off, it loses value in the market. and you've got the collapse.
Okay, I have one question. You mentioned trust breaks down and then the banks start demanding collateral very slowly at first, and then it came to a head in 2006. When did the trust break down? Was it the Korean War?
It's hard to figure out. It's sometime between, I would say, the 1965 and 2006, because nobody in the 70s and 80s, 90s, early 2000s, people aren't looking into collateral markets yet. There's not enough data to say, hey, this is the day it broke down. I can give you a couple decades, best I can get.
So you mentioned Korea. That war fascinates me. I was just reading Barry Goldwater's memoirs, and he was talking to McCarthy, General MacArthur, and MacArthur said he was trying to win the war, but somebody in the U.S. or the State Department wouldn't let him win the war. I guess my question is: are these wars a consequence of these, let's call them, illegitimate financial systems, or do these illegitimate financial systems want these wars to cover things like the Eurodollar? Do you have any idea?
I honestly don't think banks want war. It's bad for business, especially right now. You have a global war. If we just look at the war between Russia and Ukraine, you cut off one of the most important countries, or two of the most important countries for varying different reasons, from global trade. Ukraine can't properly export its grain. So you have Africa for the next probably decade or more going to have a food crisis. And here in Canada, the price of fertilizer has skyrocketed because Russia can't sell its fertilizer to the rest of the global markets. So I don't really think banks like war. It's not good for business. You can't transact freely. Money's not moving freely. Where you get the people who want war would be the guys who make the guns and bombs. And the people they buy in governments.
People might get angry at what I'm going to ask, but what you're saying runs contrary to all these people that always scream all wars are banker wars and Rothschilds and whatnot. You're saying that's completely wrong.
I don't think it's completely wrong. The Rothschilds are known to like war, but it's harder to make money. Like, if specific countries go to war with each other. If we had another global conflict, how does a bank make money on loans to China for the Chinese markets to make stuff? With the wars that look like they might happen, or at least separation in banking systems, it's bad for business. Really bad for business. The West doesn't make anything anymore. Germany's industrial sector, because of the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines, is gone. The rest of Europe, or the rest of Western Europe, doesn't produce enough. Canada, we've got natural resources, but we don't use them to even half of their extent. We have very few manufacturing left. The U.S. is even worse. The only country that's close to the West that makes anything anymore is Mexico. But if you wanted to do business there, you got to do business with the cartels. That's bad for business. Everybody wants to look for the easy escape of who to blame, and banks are convenient. Nobody likes a banker. They take your money and make more money. They take the money that you worked hard for, put it into markets, do very little hard work, and they can turn $100 into 10,000 given enough time. So yeah, let's blame the bankers for everything. When in reality, I think it's more complex.
Let's shift gears to Canada. We'll come back to the Eurodollar, but you said that in Canada we have a lot of natural resources, but we're not using them. Obviously, oil is a big one right now. But like, when did that change? I'm assuming at some point we did, and obviously I'm running for the PPC. What would you recommend in terms of policy to encourage domestic production in Canada?
I think the biggest thing is government just not handing out contracts. Like, we've got, like, I'm here in Ontario. Northern Ontario is, you can't dig down and not hit a vital mineral, whether it be lithium, copper, there's some gold, there's silver, like there's cobalt. All the minerals that we need basically are in Northern Ontario, and yet getting the proper permitting is very difficult. So I think if we increase the permits we give out, we use those resources, we can at least start growing our mining sectors. The harder bit is going to be manufacturing, because I don't think there's any place in Canada right now where you would want to start a manufacturing business. Just government regulation is one thing, but you also have to deal with people want, if you're working, say, at Toyota, they want to be a part of the union. The union's got to have its due, so you have to pay another entity so your workers will work. You pay for benefits. They'll want a pension, which I don't know how we allow pensions when they are obvious scam. The math straight doesn't work out for a pension.
Can I pull on that thread? Because pensions are another thing I'm really interested in. Are you talking about Government of Canada pensions, or are you talking about private pensions?
Both are a problem. If you just allow me to break down the math, if you say a worker pays in 10% to their pension, okay? As the pension fund manager, I have to take that 10% and grow it 10x for every dollar given to me, just to be able to pay out the pension. That doesn't cover my costs. And the costs aren't terribly high, but you have to pay very smart people that are expecting a high salary, because going into the markets to make money is no easy task. Growing money seems easy until you try to do it yourself. One of the best hedge funds, was it Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's hedge fund? They expect a 2 to 3% return every year, and that's doing business at a high level, and you're doing great at 3 to 4%. But you need at least a minimum of a 10% return just to lose money on operating costs. Or sorry, I said 10%, 10x return. So 1,000% return on every dollar.
I want to simplify it even further, because I think this pension thing, I have a sneaking suspicion that the majority of Canadians don't understand what a pension is. They just think it's something you do so that you when you retire, you don't starve. But it's a fund, right? It's an investment fund you're paying into.
Yes. If you have a private pension plan or a public pension plan, so not only are you paying into, like, you work at, I don't know, Stats Canada, you're paying into your government pension plan, but then you probably have an RRSP. That's another pension plan that you're probably paying into. But then you also have the Canada pension plan that you pay into. So at the minimum, you're paying into two. Maybe you've got your RRSP, so that's a third one. Your RRSP is probably going to do better than either of the other two, because at least you can manage the risk yourself. So if you wanted to go all in gold, you could buy gold ETFs, gold mining companies, whatever, and your money's going to be relatively safe. But you give it to some other pension, like you give it to the Canada Pension Fund, they don't know what they're doing. The government doesn't hire the best of the best. It hires who they can get. So that's where you get now tax dollars going into the Canada Pension Fund to keep it topped up so that it doesn't collapse.
Walk me through that. You're telling me that they're stealing the tax dollars to prop up this Canada Pension Fund?
I don't think they've done it yet. They haven't hit the point where we don't have enough money coming in to make all the payouts, but it's going to come soon. And if the money in the fund dips low enough, they're going to have to top it up. Otherwise, you're going to have young people, old people being like, what do you mean? Where's my retirement fund? Where's my money? So that's a massive problem just brewing in the shadows.
Going back, I really should name this show the Dumbing Things Down show, but going back to the concept of an investment fund, if I have $1,000 a month lying around, I'm going to put that in an investment fund, and hopefully that fund will grow to offset the effects of inflation, so that when I retire in 30 years, at least I didn't lose my money. Hopefully I'll have more, but at least I didn't lose my money. Do you agree with that, kind of?
Yeah, I would agree, but I wouldn't say it's to offset the effects of inflation. It's just money has three qualities to it to be defined as money. What is it? It's a unit of account.
Medium of exchange.
Yeah, medium of exchange, and then it's a hedge against inflation. But that third one, I don't think you can ever use that, because there's not any type of money on earth that hasn't been inflated. Even if we want to go back to hard gold currencies, there's always new gold coins being minted. And then on top of that, we don't have enough gold mines to mint to mine enough gold to mint enough gold coins. So we're gonna lighten the coins a little bit. Money as like against inflation just doesn't make sense. So buying an asset of some kind that at least holds its value is a better idea. That's what I think you should use an investment fund for. It's a fairly liquid way to save your money. Instead of in a savings account where maybe you'll get a couple percent a year in return.
Okay, I agree with you. So maybe I misspoke saying a hedge against inflation, but basically a pension is you're putting it into a fund for your retirement. The government of Canada is taking people's money. Government of Canada is basically saying you're an irresponsible citizen. You don't know how to save. Give it to me, and I'll save it better. And then they're taking that money and they're acting as like a intermediary and putting it in a fund. Why is it that some people can't get their retirement? Is it that they mismanage the fund? Do they steal from the fund? Or is it
Well,
bad investments?
I don't know if they steal from the fund. I don't think there's ever been proof of that, but it's really, I think it just boils down to the math of you have to take every dollar and turn it into $15, $20 to pay out, because they don't decrease how much money you're getting out of your pension. It's always increasing. They're always like, okay, $1,500 is enough. We'll give you $1,550. I don't know, like, if there's a group of hedge fund managers that could manage a fund for, let's just say, 10 years and keep up that high rate of return without doing some illegal stuff.
So when you say a high rate of return, what's the high rate of return? What is the irrational promise that they're making?
As far as I'm aware, the Canadian pension plan will pay you out for, what is it? You get the top, I think, 3 years of your salary, and whatever percentage that works out to be a month. You're paying everybody out at the highest possible rate while getting less than 10% or so of their money a month. Even if you have that money for 30 years, in those 30 years, you have at least 3 recessions on average. So you have to keep not just keep, say, $100 at $100 for 30 years through 3 recessions. You have to keep that $100 so that it's at least $1,000 through 30 years and 3 recessions.
Maybe I don't understand pensions as well as I thought. I thought a pension is you make $100,000 a year, you're working for 30 years, and then when you retire, you get $50,000 a year. Is that what a pension is?
It depends on whatever pension you're paying into. They've all got their own special wording, but it's something like that. But you're not paying in out of your $100,000 salary. You're not paying in $50,000 a year. You're paying in way less than that. You may be paying in $5,000 a year, and then you got to have, with the standard of living and life expectancy, people living, say, to 85 years of age, retiring somewhere around 65. So you got 20-ish years where you have to pay $50,000 a year out to this person.
And when you're referring back to that 10x return, you're talking about how every year you're paying in 5,000, but when you retire, you want out 50,000.
Yes. So
Okay.
that 10x return is you put in 5,000, and by the time you retire, that 5,000 needs to produce so that you have $50,000 for. I don't know how you do that without eventually having to run to the government saying, "Hey, we need some money to top this off." If it's a private plan, the company can eat into, if they have a war chest of money or the profits. It's easy. There are ways to top it up. But the Canada pension plan, that's basically a lot of Canadians' retirement plan at this point. So some government down the line is going to say we need to either take out money from the budget to put in there so that people get their pension, or we have to issue Canadian bonds, which is just more debt to get money to put in the pension.
I think this is the sort of proverbial kicking the can down the road, because somebody must have figured this out. They're just making empty promises. They'll never be able to. 10x return is insane.
A pension is the textbook definition of a Ponzi scheme.
Okay, you read my mind. That's where I was headed. Do you think this ties into immigration? Are they just bringing these immigrants in so that they can hire them and then use a portion of their pension proceeds to pay off the previous pensioners?
No, I don't think that's what's happening. I think what they're trying to do with bringing in the mass amount of immigration is plug a hole in the workforce. They have no idea how it got there and how to fix it. So since 2008, since that crash, people have just dropped out of the workforce. They're completely able to work, but they are choosing not to. And that percentage of able-bodied people that could work but choose not to is growing every year. If the labor force shrinks, the economy shrinks, growth goes down, and if you're the prime minister, you don't want to be the prime minister who resides over, say, a yearly growth rate of negative 2%, and you can only change the equation to get those growth metrics so much to maybe have a chance of having a positive number. Eventually, it's going to be everybody's going to look around and being like, you say there's 2% growth, but I haven't seen any growth. My neighbor got laid off, blah, 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 blah. So that's what I think the mass immigration is there, is trying to plug in this hole in the economy. Now, they're doing it way too fast. And on top of that, hey, we're going to bring in all these people from all these different cultures and pretend that's not going to be a problem. They are also handing them out money on a monthly basis at a higher dollar amount than the Canadian pension.
So, I don't know. I'm a business guy. Like, I've run a couple of small businesses, and when things get too convoluted or too disorganized, like the company implodes. So I'm looking at this. You can't pay your pensions, so you bring in immigrants and then you pay the immigrants. It's like spending money when you're already bankrupt. Like, what's going on?
I don't know. I think they're just sticking to their ideology. They're not thinking with any critical part of their brain. They're just like, diversity is really good, so let's get all the diversity. That's what mass immigration seems to me. Because I can't think of anything else where it would make sense. You've got people who have looked into the WEF and say, oh, they're trying to bring in a one world government. How do you do that? Well, you collapse every government. I don't buy that, because politicians may be stupid and a little bit Machiavellian, but that level of pure evil is very rare in reality. I just think they were taught at school, because they all go to the same schools with similar professors, so they all end up thinking very similarly that, hey, mass immigration is real good. You get all this diversity. We need the cultural diversity.
What about the biggest argument that people make in support of immigration is some form of we have a labor shortage or immigrants bring more money in than they take out, which I think is actually true. Like, I always say immigrants aren't people to the government. They're like a check. What do you say to that?
There's a certain amount of immigration that's good, but it's like everything else. There's a fine line. Sure, they may be able to temporarily boost the economy, but successive generations do not pay dividends. So you have the first generation that comes in. They are extremely hardworking, high productive individuals. Their kids typically are also very high in productivity, but you start to see a slowdown. And then the third generation they're completely native at that point. They would think of themselves first and foremost as Canadians, maybe Canadian plus whatever ethnicity they are. So and because of them thinking of themselves as Canadians, they tend to act like Canadians, so they end up being slightly less productive. It's plugging a hole. Instead of looking at why can't we get back onto track of growth metrics before 2008, instead of, if you look at the growth metrics, it's a pre-2008, it's a very sharp increase. 2008 happens, decrease, little V recovery, and then every year afterwards, the recovery flattens out. So now we're basically at a plateau. And instead of looking at how do we fix that, what's the underlying issue that's causing no recovery, we'll bring in immigrants and they'll start businesses. That'll patch the problem. Damn the consequences.
What do you say to? I was just driving through the U.S. and I drove through Montana, South Dakota, down Georgia to Florida. Like the number one difference I see between Americans and Canadians is that they have property rights and they're proud of their property. They invest in their property. They're stewards of their land. And the government, at least in the red states, they take a more of a hands-off approach and just let people engage in activity. But in Canada, I feel like we're beaten down and people don't understand we're so insanely regulated to death that it's almost demoralizing. Do you think that has anything to do with what happened in 2008?
2008 was synchronized global decline because of the Eurodollar. But even before that, you can start to feel with that there's a lot of oppressive government interference in the average person's life. Trying to get a permit from your local municipality to improve your property is a nightmare. If you want to, at least where I am, if you want to build a gazebo, you have to contact an engineering firm, get drawings, submit the drawings to your local municipality. They check the drawings. They probably say, oh, you can't really do this where you have it. You have to move it maybe a foot or so. And then you have to submit another drawings with the proposed changes. And all of it costs money. And it's not cheap. It's not, hey, I'll pay $50 for a permit. When you're done, you could pay upwards of $1,000 in government fees to build a gazebo that is going to cost you $700 in materials. Why would you want to do that? There's so much bureaucracy anything you want to do in Canada, it makes you think, I don't want to do that.
I'm picking up on what you said. It was before 2008, the interference. I was looking at the price of land in Canada. Something happened in 2001 where the interest rates, they stayed low and the price of property just shot up. Do you think, was it 9/11? Like, what happened in 2001?
I honestly think it's where the housing crisis really started. Something happened in the system. I don't know where, but developers can't get the land to build properties. Like, zoning is a nightmare. Getting something rezoned from, I don't know, industrial to residential takes forever if you can even get it done. And with supply being so limited with where you can build like a house, you would think that any housing developer that's still around could find a way to bribe enough city councils to get things done, to get stuff done, but it's not happening. In my area, in the subdivision I live in, there was a house with an unfinished basement and in need of some work on, I think, less than 1/10 of an acre. And during COVID, it was going for over $1 million. Their asking price was 1.1, and I think it sold for 1.35. The house maybe cost, like, to build it new, half that. So there's massive profit margins, but something is stopping developers from building houses. At least in my area, one of the problems is the government. When a housing developer would say, okay, I'm building this development in this land, the city council would come in and say, okay, what day do you want us to come in to build the roads, put in the utilities, put in the streetlights, and the taxpayers will cover it. Now, that's being charged to developers. So that's an extra cost, and that's probably part of the problem. But still, your margins are so high that if you account for bribes, having to pay for utilities to be brought in, you're still could be making 40% profit margin on a house with this crazy demand. And it goes up with apartment buildings. Because you build, at least where I am, you spend 40, 50 million for a decent sized apartment building and you're selling it for 100. Something in the system is broken. And I don't think it's just government regulation. I think part of the problem may be access to funds. I've been thinking about it for the last 3-4 months as the housing crisis has become more popular in the news. And no one thing fits. And I don't even know if there's 10 things that fit. Something is wrong and nobody's looking deeply at it. Nobody's going to the developer and saying, hey, what do you need to make a 300 house subdivision or 2 apartment buildings? Nobody's doing that. You have the liberals going, okay, we're going to save you some money. We're going to get rid of the GST. Okay, that's 5%. Then you've got Poilievre and the conservatives going, well, we're gonna ease out. We're gonna make the bureaucracy go away. We're gonna make it go faster. Okay, that'll help. But if we go back to prior to Justin Trudeau, And prior to the banking crisis, we don't have massive developments. It's, again, 2001. Everything starts to slow down. And nobody's asking why.
We just passed the 1 hour mark, and I think it's a good place to stop. The reason I wanted to get you on a call is I think one of the problems is our politicians, they're almost like actors. Like they're either not very intelligent, or they just don't care about the solutions. They look at their campaign managers and they're like, oh, this poll's nice, that poll's nice. And people's attention spans, they're not really that great sometimes. So you get things like Jagmeet Singh, which I think he's the most evil person in government right now, because he's just playing on people's emotions, trying to get people angry. But I think what we need is more people like you, who you're an ordinary Canadian, but to me, you're an expert, because I haven't asked you a single question that you couldn't answer. I don't know. I'll leave you with the final words, sir.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail in the coffin. We've got problems that government probably helped create, if not outright created. And people are looking at the people who caused the problem, say, hey, solve it, instead of stepping up and figuring out what's wrong. How do we fix it? And I think that's what we need to start doing is, as Canadians, look at the problems in our local communities, because we're not going to solve a nationwide problem without having local infrastructure. And just start a list. What is the number one problem in your community? Okay, it's housing. How do we tackle the housing problem in this specific community? What is stopping housing solutions from occurring in this specific community? Because if you go to broad solutions, they don't work ever, especially from a government. And that's why I've liked the PPC message is we are going to drill down as far as it takes to fix the problem. We will give the communities the power to fix it. We will empower the people to fix their problems that they need fixed.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, I support the PPC, but I agree that like the solution has to be bottom up. And although I'm running for public office, I don't think the solution should be political. It should be like rank and file Canadians making changes in their purchasing habits, making changes in who they communicate with and associate with. And like you said, like going to your town hall and saying, well, what's the problem? What's the solution to the housing shortage, for example?
Mm-hmm.
Tyler, thank you very much for coming on to this show, the first episode. And I had a blast chatting with you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Oh, man, it was a great little chat. I usually have these talks with my dad, so having someone else to talk to has been great. You have a great weekend.
All right. Thanks, Tyler.